So my name is Karen Nelson. I'm the on staff in the Department of English at the University of Maryland as the co-director of the Center for Literary Comparative Studies. And it gives me very great pleasure to be joined today by Danuta Hinc and Rebecca Holden, who are here to talk about Danuta's most recent publication, When We Were Twins. Rebecca J. Holden is a principal lecturer in the department who earned her MA and PhD in English literature from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and received a BS in communication studies from Northwestern University. She has taught numerous courses at the university level in composition, creative writing, and liberal studies. As well as teaching, she works as a literary scholar in the area of feminist science fiction. She has published essays and reviews on various science fiction writers and books in Foundation, Science Fiction Studies, LA Review of Books, Women of Other Worlds, Excursions Through Science Fiction and Feminism, and Lunescent Threads, Connections to Octavia Butler. Holden has served as a reviewer for Extrapolation, African American Review, and the Masters of Science Fiction series from the University of Illinois Press. She co-edited and contributed to a critical anthology with Nisi Shaw titled Strange Matings, Science Fiction, Feminism, African American Voices, and Octavia E. Butler, and also edited a collection of pieces on WisCon, a feminist science fiction convention titled Regenerating WisCon. In 2014, Holden co-chaired the annual Science Fiction Research Association conference. In addition to her academic publications, she's a published photographer and poet. So welcome, Rebecca, and I'll turn over everything to you.
Thanks so much, Karen. That was very nice. It's nice to hear those things, even though we primarily are teaching, right?
Right, but you do all these other things and you make them all happen around all the teaching. And so we need to celebrate how hard you work. So yeah, you. So yeah.
Thank you. And we're here today to celebrate Danuta. And in fact, so I met Danuta back in 2011 when she started teaching here at the PWP, Professional Writing Program. And she is now a principal lecturer in the program as well. But a few other things about Danuta, again, things that she does outside of her teaching. Danuta is a Polish-American award-winning novelist, short story writer, and essayist. She holds an MA in philology from the University of Gdansk, Poland, and an MFA in writing and literature from Bennington College, where she received the Barry Hanna Merit Scholarship in Fiction. So Danuta, as I always refer to her as Danuta, her essays and short fiction have appeared most recently in Literary Hub, Washingtonian Magazine, Popula, The Brick House, and Consequence Magazine, among others. Today we are here to celebrate her newest publication, as Karen mentioned, When We Were Twins. When We Were Twins was translated from the Polish by Danuta, and an earlier version of the book was published under the title To Kill the Other, which was described by the Midwest Book Review as a fascinating and well-written story, a highly recommended pick not to be missed. And I'm going to probably mispronounce this name, so Danuta can correct me. Askell Melnichuk, all right, described the book by saying, the questions her novel explores about love and war, about family, peace, and the price of freedom couldn't be more urgent. Hinc's imagination here revs at full throttle, and we would be wise to go along for the ride. Sven Burketz concluded, infused with urgency and propelled by a sense of the world in catastrophic mode, Danuta Hinc's When We Were Twins exposes the tangled fates of people caught up in events they cannot control. The prose finds its pulse right from the start, and the reader feel its animating force throughout. And ignore my dog's barking. I want to get to a note from the Kirkus reviews. And this was a more recent review. The Kirkus reviews wrote about it, that as a psychological snapshot of radicalization, this is a subtle work, one that astutely highlights the many ways in which Egyptians could feel betrayed, not only by Western powers more interested in their resources than their freedom, but also by their own leaders. So, and I have just finished, again, rereading Danuta's book, and we'll get to this a little later, but in light of recent political events, it's become even more more telling or more poignant, I think, even, and at least for me in my reading, some other things that went into it. Just to let you know how we're going to start today, we're going to have Danuta start by reading a few sections from the book, and then we'll get into some questions. She and I will talk through some questions that we have sort of looked at, and then I will open it up for anybody who has any questions, in the last 20 minutes, you can feel free to speak or put a question in the chat, and I will read it from the chat for people. But without further ado, I want to introduce Danuta and have her read from her book.
Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Karen, for the introduction. Thank you, Rebecca, for the nice introduction. Yes, I will read two sections. It will take about 10 to 12 minutes. The first section is when the twins Taher and Aisha are about 6 years old. So we'll see the dynamic and who they are sort of at this age. And then the second section will be also about the twins Taher and his twin sister Aisha, but this will be from the time when they are about 30 years old. So I will start from their childhood. For the children, the garden has its own hidden mysteries that are revealed in the deepest corners, behind the azaleas thick with heavy and sweet blooms. One day the mysteries reveal themselves as the fear and hopelessness of a spider's prey, seeping slowly through the high cocoon when Taher tries to free a butterfly. Tiri, go, he cries as loud as he can, throwing the sticky and motionless body in the air, still hoping, not yet grasping, the radical power of death. Another day, the mysteries come in the form of discovering the forbidden, when Aisha crawls under the bush and helps grandmother Rumaisa's favorite cat deliver her naked and defenseless kittens. Cat-cow, pussycat, Aisha reaches for them without hesitation. Mesh, come here. She crawls on her stomach. Don't be afraid. Mesh, she says, stroking the soft fur stained with blood. My little babies. She embraces the huddled, squeaking, blind creatures with pride and gratitude for having witnessed the beginning of new life. The day Aisha confesses her envy to Taher, they are alone in the garden. Tired from running, they decide to rest at the edge of the flower pool. The air is thick with sweetness, hovers in the sweltering sun, slowing their breaths, filling their bodies with blissful weight. Receding behind the tall palm trees, the sun throws long lines around the flower pools. The day, closing slowly to the Al-Maghr prayer, evokes silent anticipation. Taher closes his eyes and tilts his head slightly back and to the side, and his imagination takes over. He arises like a bird or a cloud, lightly and silently, with no effort. He stretches his arms and glides towards the highest roofs, where he stops for a while to look at the minarets shimmering on the background of the clearest sky, and the silver surface of the lake surrounded by white beaches at the edge of the city. After his eyes finally feel satisfied with all he wanted to see in the distance, he steers himself above the roof to find the long swords of palm leaves that strayed into that drain pipe. Controlling every single movement of the descent, he lowers himself and reaches for the leaves. He picks them up gently between his fingers and studies the rough surface, always with the same astonishment. They are drying up already. He whispers and busies himself with finding more and more different colors, from greens to dark browns, depending on how much time they spent in the blazing sun. He inhales deeply, the high air filled with the smell of the sea. The sun is lowering itself to close the day with a silent, gentle breath of a soft breeze, when Taher suddenly is jolted by cold blades. Only after he opens his eyes, he understands it is water. Aisha laughs, hitting the surface of the water in the flower pool, splashing her brother and screaming. Wake up, Taher, wake up. You are so stupid, he screams, jumping off the edge. Me? She laughs louder and hits the surface of the water with all her might. The white fans spring towards Taher faster and faster, darkening the edge of the pool and the polished river rocks covering the path under their feet. Stop it, Taher yells, moving back and wiping his face. You are stupid. And you sleep all the time, she mocks his voice. I don't, Taher defends himself. I don't sleep. I think. About what? She doesn't give up. Making up silly stories again? You are jealous. He knows how to hurt her. A long silence falls over the garden. Aisha wipes her hands on her dress and starts to pick at her nails. For a while, she looks at the goblets of the lotus flowers and the flat leaves speckled with fast-drying drops of water, and then she moves her gaze to the pebbles on the paths, to the tips of the trees. Kicking her right foot in the air, she stays silent. It's different for you, Aisha. Taher sits down next to her. It's different because you are a girl, he says softly. They all see only you. She looks him straight in the eye. They cheer only you. Taher is a true miracle. He memorized the Quran. Taher, Taher, Taher. And you are the faster runner, remember? And also, Taher doesn't finish. She jumps off the edge as if on fire. Do you always have to be such a saint? She screams, stomping her foot. I'm not a saint. You are. She interrupts him again, stomping her foot one more time. And you are too. He spreads his arms helplessly. No, I am not. I am not, and I don't want to be. I don't want to be good. I don't want to. I don't want to be myself. She holds back her tears, shivering. What are you talking about? Taher takes a step towards her. You are crazy. You are stupid like everyone else. She screams, running towards the thick bushes in the farthest corner of the garden. So that's the first excerpt. And now, again, the twins, Taher and Aisha, when they are about 30 years old. When Aisha calls, Taher jumps and accidentally kicks the table. After composing himself, he looks around, embarrassed. Luckily, no one at the restaurant pays any attention to him. He's not used to carrying a cell phone in his pocket, and every time it rings, it startles him. He is sitting on a patio with a view of the Mosque of Muhammad Ali in Cairo. In the distance, the dome looks white, and the two tallest minarets are silver. In front of him is a plate with 2 pieces of kunafa, a blue teapot, a sugar bowl, and a glass of black tea. Did I startle you again? Aisha says. I can't get used to it. Taher laughs. But isn't it wonderful? I can call you from Berlin. Imagine that. She says, laughing too. In the background, children's voices scream. One uses actual words. Mine, give it back. Mine. The other is just a high-pitched scream. How are they? Taher asks. I'm losing my mind. Aya just started walking, so she's everywhere now. And Atta is trying to keep his toys away from her. It's a madhouse. She laughs. Walter is coming back tomorrow from his business trip, and I already can't wait to hand them over, she says, the tone of her voice light. It would be nice to see the kids next month, Taher says, looking at the mosque. The structure seems to float above the hill. About that, Aisha says, can you bring me Mom's watercolors? All of them, please? That would be too heavy. There are like 7 or more, he says. Oh, no, not the frames. Take them out and roll them up. Oh, I can do that, no problem. Taher says and takes a sip of his tea. You are the best brother, Taher, Aisha says to the screams of her son. You wouldn't have said that when we were twins. He says, remember, we used to fight like Aya and Atta. Where? Aisha says, laughing. What are you talking about? I mean children, when we were children. Back then, I could feel you being my twin or something like that. He says and looks into the distance, sipping his tea. Now, he pauses. The children have quieted down, and he can hear Atta saying, Aya, you can have this one, okay? I will always be your twin sister, Taher, Aisha says quietly. I know, and also I don't know. I can't feel it anymore. I can't find you in myself, he says. They both pause and listen to the sounds around them for a moment. What about you, Taher? Aisha says, how are you doing, really? Taher starts to say something, but what he says makes no sense. Disconnected words and sounds with no structure or essence follow the choppy line of his voice. He's trying to find the right words while also deciding if he wants to tell her the truth. Just say it, Aisha says, and Taher suddenly remembers that she had always understood him better than anyone else. I am thinking about going back to Afghanistan with Ahmed, he says. No, Taher, don't do it. Nothing good can come of it. Go back to college, finish your medical degree. She's trying to be convincing, but her tone is not focused. Her attention is elsewhere. The children are screaming again. Taher imagines his sister waving her hand and bringing her index fingers to her lips, but he knows that her children are too young to follow such a signal. As he waits for her to calm them, something in him and around him moves. It's like a wave that rearranges things and leaves a new order. He feels himself disconnecting from Aisha, not because she said, don't do it, but because he said, I can't feel it anymore. I can't find you in myself. With these words, he has created a new reality. The disconnection is not a rupture, he realizes. It is the conclusion of something very gradual. It's like a coastline that erodes a little bit every year, eating away the land, expanding the way of the ocean. Thank you.
Thanks, Danuta. So we're going to jump in, but at first I want to also just make a note again, and if people are not aware, the book here, Taher is one of the 9/11 terrorists. So, and you get this from the very beginning of the book, and we come back to that scene at the very end of the book. And I have, like I said, known Danuta for 12 years, I think, somewhere around that. And I've read many of her pieces, particularly a lot of her shorter essays that have been published, and primarily in that nonfiction narrative mode that I've read for mostly. And one of the things when I was reading this book the first time, I was really like, oh my God, I had no idea Danuta knew so much about the Mideast and the cultures and the language and the religions that she dives into here. That I was, again, like, wow. And in fact, I told Danuta when we were talking about this, I was wondering, did she spend time in the Mideast? Had she lived there, spent some time there? So my question to Danuta is, what drew you to this character and to this story, and the story that you sort of trace out over the basically 30 years, because you do go back to the twins' birth. So what was it that brought you to this story?
I think the original impulse came from the events of 9/11, but then other questions kind of sparked my imagination, I suppose. Mostly how important it is to avoid a single story that Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie is talking about, the danger of a single story, to understand better what was happening really after 9/11 and how the world reacted to it. And unfortunately, we are in a very similar place today with the war between Israel and Hamas. So I think I wanted to understand the dynamics of how a person can become radicalized. So 9/11 was the initial impulse, but the radicalization was the subject that interested me the most. And then the following question, the next important question that I wanted to explore was, can I see humanity in someone who commits a horrible act? And is it possible to see the humanity? Because I felt like this is the kind of the beginning of a dialogue. It makes the dialogue possible. If we could sort of entertain the question of humanity of someone who commits a horrible act. And of course, as after 9/11, and we see it also here right now with the war between Israel and Hamas, all nuance is lost. All we see is black and white kind of interpretation and narratives of the conflict and what is unfolding right now. So I think that that was my biggest sort of challenge, to see if first we can see the humanity of someone who commits a horrible act, and if this can be the beginning of a dialogue.
I'm just going to pick up on a word that you said, because it's also a word that shows up in a lot of the reviews of the book, is focusing this idea of nuance. So this idea of bringing nuance to a story that people want to see as all one way or all another way. And I think that that's really important, and this idea of creating a dialogue is really, really key. I did want to ask you a little bit about your research process for this book, because it's clear to me in the reading it that you know, we have the book, but there's so much that underlies it, right? I can sort of feel that in the reading, is all the stories and all the things that underlie the story that you write.
So my research was started very in a very typical way, just like every other research starts. I went to the library and familiarized myself with everything that was sort of published on the topic of radicalization and terrorism and the history of the Middle East and Islam. So that kind of the beginning was very sort of the same way we all do research. But then I did hit a wall when I had very specific questions and I couldn't answer them. Like, for example, I'm going to just use one question. I didn't know what would happen to a child when parents divorce in Egypt. It was very difficult. You know, you can't, I was like, you can't really figure it out unless you talk to people and learn from interviewing people. And this is what I did. I met many people from the Middle East here, but I also met them online. And they were very generous towards me and sort of led me through my research, additional research for several years. It took about 3 years of communicating back and forth and translating into Arabic, for example, because I don't speak Arabic, learning to pronounce the words that I was using in my book, but also learning about the lives of people in the Middle East. So mostly in Israel and Palestine and Egypt, but also in Iran and Pakistan. Some of the names of people who really helped me the most are included in my acknowledgement, so you can see who they are. And I am friends with some of them still today.
And I think that I remember one of the things that you said is someone else who you mentioned this in another talk that I went to, that someone who you worked with also thought that you had spent significant time in the Middle East.
Yeah, that was I think one of the biggest compliments I received about the book. And they asked me, a person from Egypt asked me how long I lived in Egypt. And that was just so wonderful to hear, because I've never lived in Egypt. I, in fact, never even visited Egypt. But we can learn a lot if we want to sort of with humility approach our subject, knowing that we have to learn a lot. Since I come from a different background, everything is accessible, especially online. For years, I read magazines and papers published in the Middle East that are accessible in English, and that also helped. So a lot of research, years of research and curiosity, I would say. And that was very helpful. Yes.
And I want to ask a little bit about your own background. So I was really drawn to your Polish character, Marek, and I've spent some time in Central Europe. And in fact, I have I wore this, and this is one of my Polish necklaces that I bought there. But I was really drawn to his character because I knew a lot of people of that age in Eastern Europe. And I could connect to his story because of the people that I knew, but also I know that's part of your background. So I was just wondering how your own personal history fed into the story as well.
That's a great question. And I feel like some of the stories are probably entering the book on a very conscious level, but some of them are entering on a kind of subconscious level that I can't still pinpoint and understand myself. The Polish characters are my favorite characters in the book because they actually talk about people who existed in the Polish history, like Marek, for example, the fighter in Afghanistan. Even though he is, of course, a fictional character. And after he was constructed, I learned that there was actually a Polish person who fought in Afghanistan as well. So there are, Marek represents to me kind of the essence of a Polish patriot who wants to fight people who, in his opinion, oppressed Poland, which would be in this case the Soviet Union, who occupied really Poland for many years after World War II. So he is kind of the embodiment of someone like that, who is trying to find places where he could fight those who implemented terror on his country. And I've heard those stories growing up as a child. On another level, there is a story, for example, of the delivery of Taher and Aisha in the hospital during war between Egypt and Israel. And the delivery, the way it is written in the book, is based on what happened to my mom, actually, who delivered twins in a little bit earlier in 1962. And Taher and Aisha are born in 1967, but the delivery is very similar. And I always think about it, why those stories that I know from my own childhood and from my own life of the history of Poland are kind of pushing themselves and finding their way into my own writing. So sometimes this is nonfiction, as is in my essays, but in the case of When We Were Twins, there are stories that are sort of like based on my family, but also based on the history of Poland.
And again, because Poland, in that sense, was an occupied country in your childhood, and that's something too that then crosses over to Afghanistan and other places where you're seeing some of the similarities, right, between the two.
That's right. That's right. It's very hard to talk about conflicts while they are happening. Like it's too raw. The wound is open wide, like right now in Israel and in Gaza. right? So it's almost like you can't talk about it right now, but nevertheless, I believe that this is an important conversation sort of to have when, especially when the time is right to talk about it.
So I want to jump to sort of a slightly different topic and focusing a little bit more on the relationships, because again, and this is a book about radicalization, but it's also a book, as you said, about creating dialogue and looking at people's relationship to other people. And that to me is one of the things that really, really drew me into the story, is the relationships that I see here. So there's the relationship that we heard a little bit of in your reading between Taher and Aisha, right? The twins that are sort of the central focus. But then there's a relationship between Taher and his cousin Ahmed, as well as, we see some of these sort of fleeting ones Taher has with Merrick's wife, Irene, who shows up later, as well as some of the other characters that you sort of see. And some of them I really loved from the reading today when you're looking at, I think there were 7 at the beginning, the twins, and saying, "You're stupid." It really, to me, is like, this is, it's real to me. I can really sort of feel that relationship. I can hear that relationship. And I just wondered if you want to talk a little bit about the importance of the relationships between some of these different paired characters.
Yes, so Ahmed plays the role like a father figure in Taher's life. Taher, as we could see from the first excerpt I read, is this sensitive, very sensitive and kind to his sister. He's studious, bright, intelligent person. So we see sort of him as someone who has a very promising future. And then he becomes very closely, kind of in a very closely knit relationship with his older cousin, much older, 11 years older cousin Ahmed, who is imprisoned for the assassination of Sadat, even though he has nothing to do with it. And sort of this experience forms him, and he becomes set on helping in Afghanistan as a medic. And Taher kind of joins him. And this is like the beginning of the adult life for Taher when he's 16 years old, drops out of high school really to join his older cousin. And the cousin sort of forms young Taher. So that's an important relationship. Another important relationships probably are the relationships in Afghanistan between, for example, Volodya, the Ukrainian soldier, and Taher, and others, the mujahideen in Afghanistan, where Volodya explains to them what war really is and what it is it not, and how it influences everyone, and how no one ever wins. Other relationships, of course, there is an amazing relationship between Irene and Marek. So they are married and they have twins, Julie and little Marky. And sort of Marek leaves the relationship with Taher and is pulled towards love and life by his wife and his children. But Taher never finds kind of this sort of way. He follows the way that is the opposite of what Volodya was trying to teach him, or what Marek was trying to teach him, or what the short relationship he has with Irene, Marek's wife. There are many sort of twins in the book, sort of that actually they are either biological twins, or they are just twins as friends, or twins as human beings. There is also a relationship, sort of, we see it in one chapter where there is a relationship between 2 homeless women who consist of, they become sort of one person, and the person, if I can call it a person, they form a union that is a god. And Taher meets also a god on his way to the airport, and the god, which is two women, is trying to explain to Taher the essence of life and relationships, and how we can see each other only if we look at the heart or the other of another person. Yes, there's many relationships. There is no time to go through all of them, but they always kind of come back into this braided line of the plot in the novel, where people are connected to each other in a very fundamental, basic way.
So there's a lot of stuff you said there that I'm like, oh, I want to ask more about this. So I'm gonna go back to one thing. First, I'm gonna talk about Volodya, who is the Ukrainian soldier, so who has basically deserted in Afghanistan and has joined the group that Taher is part of. Yes, and he's arguing to them about war. And this is something too that, like, when I was rereading the book, especially in light of the current war, right, with Israel and Hamas, that's something that he says, and he's particularly talking to Ahmed at this point, although Taher is listening, right? Taher is this in the background. And this, I'm just going to read a little piece, because this is something that I think was really, to me, spoke really to me directly, especially this week. And this is Volodya, and he says, a war is a war, and only that, nothing else, ever. War is destruction. It's nothing but destruction. It's death. War is always a defeat for everybody, for those who win and for those who lose. War brings only loss for both sides, only loss. This is my world, but this is also your world, Ahmed. You just don't want to see it. You're fooling yourself. And to me, that's something that when you're talking also about the twinning here, and that what that means in the reflection, and from the very thing that you read about the older Taher, when he says, I no longer see you in me, that he doesn't see that reflection in himself and her anymore. And I think this gets at, to me, the idea of that one now is reflecting death and one is reflecting life, and that they can't come together. And this is what I think Volodya is basically saying, is war is death for everyone, and that leads to a loss. And to me, that was really, really sort of like it's not just that this is not something I've ever thought about before, right? War is horrible. We always see how horrible war is, but this idea that the winning it is death as well. And I thought that was really, really a great place. And also now we have the Ukrainian soldier bringing that, which was also really interesting.
That's right. So the connection Taher loses in the excerpt I read goes back to his mother, who was trying, when she saw, of course, and moms probably know this, when you see your children fighting, you try to explain to them they should love each other. And this is what she does in the novel. She explains how they are really not only brother and sister, but they are twins, and they should love each other and kind of collaborate and all of this. And so without saying too much, right, the mother succeeds in a sense in the sense that Aisha kind of signs up for life, and she is the one who will has children and has kind of like a boring, beautiful life. And then we have Taher, who can't find himself. He can't find himself in her, but also in life, unfortunately. So yeah, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question.
But no, this is and this is sort of what I see. The other thing, I mean, and this is, I'm going to ask one more question, then I want to see. And so, you guys, anyone in the audience who wants to ask a question, you could raise your hand or put it in the chat. But I'm going to ask Danuta one more question before we open it up. But I invite people to think about a question you might want to ask Danuta about the book or about her work. But my question has to do with something, this is not something that you and I have talked about before, but you mentioned the two homeless women and becoming a god. And there's also the little girl with the mirrored dress, which, and there's a few other places where, you know, my background is in science fiction and speculative fiction. So I see some speculative aspects here that are sort of slid in, right? They're kind of slid into this very realistic story. And I would just love to hear you talk a little bit about that. What was the impulse for you to do that and how that worked for you narratively? If that makes sense.
Yeah, so I wanted to show sort of like women giving birth and giving life to kind of building life. So women in the book are they hold the torch of life and love in a sense. But it also goes for little girls, like the little girl in Afghanistan who is showing Taher and the other mujahideen the way to the containers. The conflict between Northern Alliance with Massoud leading and Taliban is kind of unfolding, the conflict unfolding after the war with Russia. And so we see women kind of helping men to see what is important in life. And so I insert them in places where they are leading the change. Like for Volodya, there is an Afghani girl who is kind of teaching him the truth about war and life. And then the little girl, of course. And then there is little Julie on the plane, right? Or little Julie even in the apartment in New York where she meets Taher. So all these little girls and teenage girls and women who give birth, I mean, they are so like on the side of life. And then we have men who either follow them or not. So Marek is the one who follows the women in his life. Volodya is someone who follows the women in his life, and they are rewarded in a sense, right? So all the men who follow women in life, they are rewarded. For example, Marek can see that his wife Irene has wings and he can see the wings in the moments where he follows life. And of course, Taher also experiences the moment when he sees Irene's wings. I'm not going to say more, but yes, there are kind of like two roads that sometimes they come together and sometimes they diverge. The world of women and life and the world of men and war.
I see we have a question from Michelle in the chat, and I'll read that out to you. And then again, if anybody else has any question, please feel free to, you know, I can call on anybody who wants to raise their hand or put it in the chat. So Michelle asked, could you describe your writing and revision process? What did you learn about yourself as a writer in the process? And again, I'll put a note there. This, When We Were Twins, came as a revision of To Kill the Others. So you could even address that.
Yes, so To Kill the Other was published in 2011, and the publisher folded quickly, went bankrupt. So the book was out of print, really. And since my agent, also a screenplay writer, was interested in the book very much to kind of turn it into a screenplay, and he approached several networks. Netflix and HBO were interested in the story very much so, and they are still considering it. But the book was out of print, so it's a little problem. So I found the publisher, Plamen Press, and they allowed me to revise the book. And this is a dream of every novelist and every writer, to go back and make your book better. So I am very happy with this version, and I will not be revising it again. So what happened is I decided not only to turn the focus of the book a little bit more towards radicalization rather than 9/11, even though 9/11 was the original impulse sort of to work on this book. But so I cut out some of the chapters, I added new chapters, And most importantly, I revised the entire novel from the past tense to the present tense. So everything is in the present tense, and I think it works better. And it's more kind of like immediate, and I am happy with the revision. So I'm not sure, Michelle, am I answering your question?
The second part was, what did you learn about yourself as a writer in the process?
I've learned something that I think Jhumpa Lahiri talked about many times, that writing in your second language becomes more comfortable after about 20 years of writing in the language. And I feel like I finally arrived, meaning I feel like I am finally comfortable with my choices. I don't feel like I want to revise it constantly. So there are revisions that, of course, you know, when I read the novel right now, I see still places like, oh, this sentence should go, but I'm thinking, okay, I can live with this. The first version was not as good as I would have wished for. So I feel like what I am learning is that I love English as much as I did 20 years ago, and I know that this is still not my mother tongue. This is not the language I was born into, but it has a certain rhythm or certain music of the language that speaks to me, and that I feel at home with. And I feel like maybe now it's, after many years of writing in English, I feel like I arrived to this more comfortable place, and I think this is it. That takes time.
Ariel has a question too, and this is one that you and I had talked about before, but we didn't talk about today. So when you're working on this kind of historical fiction, how do you know when to stop researching, when to leave the library, so to speak, or are you constantly researching in tandem with your writing and revision?
Ariel, thank you for coming. Yes, so very good question, and I did think about it quite a bit. So from today's perspective, I can say that I did spend too much time on my research. There is something like too much time. I remember when I was researching the subject and learning about the Middle East, and of course about Islam, I studied the Quran, for example, with a rabbi and a Torah. We were studying Torah and the Quran at the same time with Rabbi Siegel from Columbia, Maryland. And so I arrived to a place in my research where I was thinking, okay, I need to just wait for another book about the Middle East to be published so I can learn more. And then I realized that, okay, I need to stop at some point. I have in my library downstairs, probably I would say close to 150 books that I used in my research. Some of the titles are included in the back of the book. But yes, there is something like too much research. So I think that it's very difficult to especially if you are researching something that is completely foreign to your own kind of upbringing and circumstances, and you know that you have to learn so much, right? Because you are basically ignorant of the subject and you need to learn a lot. So it took me about 3 years of research for this book. And I've learned also that I don't want to do it again, meaning my next book will be about something that is super familiar to me, which is the history of Poland. And the book is actually finished already. And so I guess this is, yes, very difficult to stop researching.
Are there any other questions from our audience today?
Yeah, I have a question. I was thinking about how, this, and I haven't read the book, so I mean, I might be able to answer my own question someday, but I thought
Go ahead, yes.
How you see yourself in conversation with other, like, particularly women writers, and I'm thinking I'm thinking particularly of the Egyptian writer Basma Abdelaziz, how you like see, she thinks about the same kinds of things, and she's writing particularly about Egypt, but she's her training is that she's a psychiatrist, so she's she very much is interested in the thinking about human relationships and the way people engage. And while her work is particularly involved in Egypt, I was just wondering if you see yourself in conversation with somebody like her, or Mohammed Hassim, the guy who wrote The Reluctant Fundamentalist, which is the novel that came to mind when I read what yours was about, because he writes about radicalization as well. So I was just wondering how you if you saw yourself in conversation with these other writers, and now that you've sort of entered this stream.
Thank you. That's a great question. Yes, I have of course, huge respect for everyone who writes about the subjects of radicalization in the Middle East, who is actually from the Middle East. It's the people from we are learning from. But you said something very important right now, and it reminded me of what Olga Tokarczuk said about psychology. She said, she's a trained psychologist as well, and she said that when a person, a patient enters therapy, and then they are kind of done with therapy, they are never the same person they were from before. They cannot access this person that they were before anymore, because they are changed. The therapy changed them to some extent. And Olga Tokarczuk says that fiction writing, novels are exactly the same. And this is my biggest wish, I think, that people, and this is my conversation with other writers and other novelists, Caroline, I am hoping that people who read my novel will not be able to be the same person they were when they started, that they will that the novel will change them some, even if it's just a little bit, right, on some very kind of fundamental way, that they might start asking themselves questions they never considered before. And I am not saying that I have answers. I just have the song, as Maya Angelou said. I don't have answers. I just have the song.
I want to pick up on another question that came up in the chat, and this related to a little bit about what you were talking about a minute ago about your new book, right? Your Poland. And Shannon asked that, was wondering if the new book on Poland was also inspired by a historical event like this one was by 9/11, or is that something that she writes, you always begin with a historical moment for your idea, or is it something else that might spark your idea? And this way it gets us a little chance to talk about what my final question would be, is like your new work. What are you working on now? So we'll sort of combine those two together for our last question here.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I am reluctant always to answer a question about where the ideas come from, because I just simply don't know. Inspiration comes in different forms. For me, the kind of the foundation of my inspiration is reading other writers, and for those of you who are writers, you know what I'm talking about. The novel that I am working on right now is so I'm revising a novel that I finished already. I'm revising it, so it will be based on a little bit on my personal life, but also a little bit on the history of Poland, especially during the Solidarity movement, that period. I was back then when the Solidarity movement started gaining power before the communism fell in 1989. I was a freshman in college, and we were all striking with the shipyard workers, like sleeping on styrofoam on the floors of the university, and supporting the strikes that were, taking kind of place literally, 3 miles from us. So the new novel will be based on this, meaning on the kind of solidarity background, historical background, but also a little bit of kind of from my own life. And it will be about immigration and relationships and heartbreak and learning new lessons and finding new homes. I think that would be the best answer I can give you right now. I might have a different one in a month or two, but this is the best.
And we do have a couple of minutes left, so I'll just wrap up by saying, in addition to the novel, I know that you often are writing essays. Do you also write? I know you've written some short stories, but what's your focus? Are you primarily see yourself as a novelist, an essayist, a short story writer, or all of the above? And what are some other things that you sort of are excited about working on?
Even though my degree from Bennington is in fiction, most of the pieces I published after graduating from Bennington were non-fictional narratives, were essays. But I think that I don't know how to answer the question, because I see myself as a novelist and essayist, but also a short story writer, even though I did not publish that many short stories as of yet. It doesn't mean that I don't have them. I actually have a collection. I'm trying to maybe one day kind of collect them in one short story collection. I'm not sure yet. But I also see myself as a teacher. I teach writing, and this is a big part of my life. I love doing what I do. My students are my inspiration as well. Discussions in the classrooms are my inspirations as well. So I feel like I'm pretty lucky to have this life where I can live with books and talk about books and writing.
I want to thank, I think we're at our last minute here. So I want to thank Karen, and I want to thank also Danuta for sharing all of her thoughts about her book. And if you haven't read it, I really do. It's one of those things, like, it was, in some ways it's a surprising read. And again, and I think that if you read this, you'll see that. And if you look at that, there's also a lot of really great things. I also want to let you know that I'm doing a little selling here. It's also already available in paperback as well as hardback, which is not always the case when books come out. And that's really nice, so that if you want it, you can buy the paperback, you buy the hardback, whatever you want. So I encourage everyone, of course, to go out and buy Danuta's book and read it. And then also, we're looking forward to your next publication, Danuta.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate everyone coming here and allowing me to spend my hour with you and talking about the things that I love. Thank you for supporting my works. Thank you, Rebecca, for wonderful questions, and Karen for facilitating all of this. And thank you for everyone who came here to support me. Thank you so much.